Grognards of Gaming. I'm Rob, the Grognard Dog, and with me, as always, are my fellow Grognards.
Miracle Mike.
and JB Bensley.
All right, so when we last laughed off, we promised the audience we were going to talk about the evil or dark side game, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I think perhaps we should start by defining what we mean when we talk about an evil game or a dark side game. And so what I am thinking when I use that term is a game where the player characters are not heroes. They are villains. They are bad guys. They're evil people. They're malicious. They're vile characters. And I'm kind of distinguishing that from an anti-hero game. But we could talk about anti-hero games in the course of this discussion, and how it might alleviate some of the problems one might encounter with an evil game, and we'll talk about those as well. So that's what I'm thinking of. How about you guys? What do you think of when we talk about an evil game or a dark side game?
Well, I mean, pretty much the same definition, but, and I will say this and we'll get into it as part of the discussion. I've seen it played well and poorly, and I'll explain what I mean by when I say that it is for some people it is difficult to play the villain or truly play the villain. But primarily I do agree with your definition, Robert.
Okay, and JB, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree with your definition. There's a difference between playing a villain and I guess what you're calling an anti-hero, which is more, I think, uh, World of Darkness. Most of their games have characters who are normally villains, but are being played as almost like misunderstood. And Even though they go about and do some fairly evil things, they're still kind of heroes. But yeah, I think that there's definitely a difference between actually doing that and actually playing a character who's villainous, who really doesn't do the right thing on purpose, or um, either that or thinks they're doing the right thing, but is in fact doing the wrong thing.
Right. Okay, good. So we're all on the same page with what we mean by the evil game or the dark side game. Uh, so let me just kick off the discussion with with the broadest stroke of the paintbrush. I think that if you're going to run an evil game or a dark side game, your goals are going to have to be different for your protagonists. I won't call them heroes. So the goals have to be different. The challenges have to be relevant for a villain. Things you might actually find that your storytelling is inverted. What are your thoughts on that, on goals and challenges and the broad storytelling mechanics?
Um, well, I'd like to start off here. I was actually reading something that I didn't realize was going to play into this, but I was reading it last week. It's a book called Proactive Role Playing, and one of the points it makes is that there's a difference between playing the good guy and the bad guy, because when we play the bad guy, or when we play the good guy, I should say, beginning, um, it's reactive because the evil forces have always done something that the good guys are trying to stop. So the story starts with the bad guys actually doing something evil, and then the good guys having to go in and thwart them. And something that's a little freeing when you're playing an evil character is you get to go in and do whatever you want and be the force that generates the problem in the first place, and go up against the good guys who are trying to the white hats who are trying to come in and stop you. So that's one thing that is different between running a dark side and a light side campaign. I think, and they make
That's
a
a
good
very good
point in it.
point. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a real good point. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Mike?
And it's interesting because I was thinking about some of this. The proactive role player I haven't gotten to yet. I want to, but it looks pretty neat. Um, but it's an interesting challenge. From the players, it can be very freeing. It can be very freeing from the player standpoint. And I was thinking about this from the game master perspective. Okay, you know, Popular term out there is BBEG, big bad evil guy, right? So now, or as the GM, are you playing the big bad good guy? And do as the GM, do you always play by the rules? Are you lawful good? And how do you do that and still make a challenge for your players? And those are
Well,
the
yeah, but
kinds of
more.
things that you have to balance as a GM, because you can play the anti-hero as the GM, but if you want a real good and evil dichotomy, you got to play the good guys. And how do you play the good guys in a challenging but realistic fashion?
Yeah, but you can also, I think, in this situation, play other bad guys too, because
Yes, you
evil
can.
doesn't always get along with evil, and you
This
can
is true.
play opposing forces that are both trying to get the same thing, but they're both evil. So you could actually do that too. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
I think that's an excellent point. And you know, there are, I guess, a number of ways you can challenge villainous characters. You know, an anti-villain could be a foil, because an anti-villain is trying to do the right thing. That could be someone from among the ranks of the villains, from among one of the ranks of one of the player characters who is doing something that is at odds with villainous characters. You can, as Jonathan said, pit another villain against a villain, and then that would always work. But you could pit the law against your villainous characters. And you know, as Mike pointed out when he made the Dungeons and Dragons dichotomy, there's a difference between lawful, and a difference between good and evil, lawful and chaotic, and good and evil. So you know, villainous you can have villainous law enforcers. So I think we saw that with Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, how do you make pirates into protagonists? Well, you make the larger milieu around them the oppressive evil empire, and then and so that and so in fighting against them, and being piratical against an evil empire, you then become the protagonist. And then another thing you could do is you could throw at the villains a hero who is just so shiny and so goody two shoes with the golden armor that it's almost fun to like bring that ridiculous caricature of a paragon down. So yeah,
well,
there are a number of
there,
challenges.
there's a film, and as you know, I always bring things back to films.
Yeah,
There's a really good film that portrays this that I love, where the bad guy actually is dragged into doing sort of the right thing at the end of the movie, and he hates it. It's an older movie with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, uh, called The Great Race, and Jack Lemmon plays the very stereotypical evil character, but he plays it so well that there's a lot of levels to it. And then uh, Tony Curtis plays the great Leslie, who's the stereotypical good guy, who's really fun to make fun of. But by the end, you really love the the Jack Lemmon character more because he's just more fun. Him,
yeah,
him trying to be evil, and he always gets squashed by the good guy. But spoiler alert, even though it's like a 60 or 70-year-old film, he ends up winning at the end because the good guy goes to do something that's noble and then lets him win. And at the end, he's like, "That's not fair! That's not fair! You let me win!" And he's screaming at him. But it's a very, very funny movie. If you ever get a chance to see it, but you could play it for laughs a little too. In that, maybe they get dragged into doing the right thing, even though they don't want to. That's
right.
kind would be kind of interesting, an interesting play of it too.
Yeah, I mean, you might have to play for it. You know, it depends. So Ni Friedrich Nietzsche said, "When you stare long enough into the abyss stares into you." You know, and Tolkien, you know, he played on that trope with the Palantirs. You know, when you looked into the Palantir, Sauron's eye was looking back at you, and so that was a good sort of literary and eventually cinematic encapsulation of that concept. And so when you play an evil game, a dark side game, and you're trying to embody evil characters, there is there's a pitfall there. And so kind of playing it for laughs might be one way around it. But this actually brings us to sort of what I kind of consider to be the prerequisite three questions you need to ask before you even attempt an evil game or a dark side game, and that is number one: is the whole group really interested in doing that? Because they may not be, and if one person isn't, it's likely, I think, that that person's going to be uncomfortable with it, and you certainly don't want to make any of your players uncomfortable. But assuming everyone is interested, then I think the second question is everybody around the table mature enough to do it? I certainly would not run an evil game or a dark side game for young players. You would have to have mature players around the table. And then the third question is are you, as the game master, prepared for the inevitable trouble that is going to occur from staring into the abyss, and are you ready to be stared back into? So and the collateral consequences of the abyss staring back into your players, and how that may throw things off the rail. So let's maybe talk about that a little bit. Um, what are some challenges that you folks can foresee? Well, let me actually ask this preliminary question. Jonathan, I know your answer because your answer is the same as my answer. But Mike, have you ever played in an evil game or a dark side game where you guys were playing villains and
Yeah.
not just anti-heroes? You have. Oh, so
Yeah.
tell.
Now, I played one with you. Come on, Rob. I played the Vegas game with you.
Yes, fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
And
So, I wonder about the Vegas game sometimes. I vacillate about the Vegas game. I think that probably is. I think that we probably are playing villains, and so just so that and Jonathan has played the Vegas game. In fact, the
But
Vegas game.
I'm not really playing a villain in it though.
No, that's true, and that's something I want to talk about. Even with the other dark side game that I have in mind for you and me. But the thing about the Vegas game, so for the listeners, the players, Jonathan excluded, the players play villains. They play gangsters. They play criminals. So Paul, he plays a mobster, and this game is set in Las Vegas in the 1960s. It's actually there was a television show called Runaway, I believe. Wasn't that it, or that was the song that they played? Trying to think. Well, in post production, I'll put the title of the song, I mean the title of the show on the screen. But it
Was
ran
it
in the
called
19. Say
was
again.
it called Crime Story? Was
It
it
may
called Crime
actually have been
Story?
called. Yeah, it might have been called Crime Story. That you're probably right, Jonathan. So that was a TV show in the 1980s, but the show took place in the 60s, and so in Las Vegas, and so that's the setting for this game. And so Paul plays like a New York gangster from the Bonanno crime family, one of the five New York families, who was sent over to Las Vegas to expand their business into Las Vegas. And Mike plays a human trafficker, someone who tries to traffic people into the United States illegally. And but uh, Mike's character is like a human trafficker with a heart of gold. Like he's like the Han Solo smuggler with a heart of gold, except he's smuggling people. And the player character cares about the people. Like he goes out of his way to protect the people he traffics. He's not like selling them into slavery and stuff like that. He's making sure that they end up in a safe and good place. And so this is why I vacillate, because when you watch The Sopranos, which if you haven't, if you're watching this video and you've never watched The Sopranos, turn this video off and go watch The Sopranos all the way
The
through,
whole thing.
the
The
whole thing,
whole thing.
and
The
then
whole
and then
thing.
and then come back to watch a Grognards game, because
Several weeks later.
it's one of the best written television shows I think ever, and I won't go into the many reasons why, but the point about The Sopranos is everybody, they're all villains. All of the characters are villains. The mobsters' wives, and you see how their children become corrupted. And yet, it's written so that the mobsters are the protagonists, the mobsters' wives are the protagonists, and you root for them, and you know that they're horrible people, but uh, they are humanized by the storytelling, and so you actually kind of feel bad for Tony Soprano, the main character, when things go awry for him, and you're hoping things go well for him, and he shows moments of humanity and like being a nice guy to his family and being a nice guy to the people he's loyal to, and then in the next scene he's like shooting somebody in the head. So it's so there. I think that shows like The Sopranos have gotten us used to um, this sort of postmodern spin on the villain where the villain is humanized, and I think that's where I wonder if the Vegas game, when I look at Paul's character, if Paul's character is really a villain, or if he is, if that really makes the game a villainous game. And
Well,
then I look at your character, Mike, where your character like has this sort of heart of gold, and then Jonathan actually plays, and this I think I love this. Jonathan plays an old actor from like the 40s and 50s who is now no longer acting. He's retired. He's bought a casino in Vegas, and he runs this casino, the Avalon, right? And
yeah,
yeah, and all of the other player characters, that's sort of like where they converge. They've decided they meet in this casino. That's like their kind of headquarters. It's their hangout spot, and things happen. The villains spawn there. The things go awry there, and then they have to deal with the situation. And so Hal, which is Jonathan's character's name, isn't really
Numa.
a villain. He isn't a bad guy, but
Oh,
he
yeah, but
go ahead.
is he evil by the by token that
By
he allows
association.
stuff to go on around him?
Right.
He doesn't do anything to try to stop it for the most part. I think if it's
Right.
important to the story, he will try to get in and you know
Excellent point.
fix
So
the
so th-
situation. Yeah.
yeah, so this is
Now
why
I'm
I
going to say,
vacillate. This is why I
Okay.
vacillate. This is why I'm not 100% convinced that that's a villain game. It could be. I mean, you can make the case for it. Uh, I think that game is different from like playing Dungeons and Dragons, where all the players are playing chaotic evil characters. That is surely an evil game. This I'm not so sure, because it does have it has a foot in the dark pool, and it has a foot in the gray pool. So yeah. I guess it's villainous. I don't know if it's an evil game. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So let me ask you both this, okay? Because now I'm curious about some of your experiences, and I'm going to give you a small dialogue, but then I have a question that's to follow the dialogue after I tell you this, and I'll give you the question up front so you can think about it, which is, where did you first start playing a villainous character? And I don't mean as a GM, I mean as a player. Okay. And the reason I say that is because my first real experience doing this, and we've talked about this before, we've talked about mushing. Okay. And Jonathan talked about World of Darkness. Okay. Um, Mushing was a very free role playing environment. And it was my first place really playing what I consider an evil character. And I don't mean the kind of characters Jonathan was talking about, because most of the mushes that I frequented had protagonist and antagonist player characters. And what I mean by that is you could play, a Camarilla vampire, but you could also play a Sabbat vampire. So they were running both sides of the coin, and the villains were player characters.
hmm,
And that's the first instance when I got to play a real villainous type of character. Was at one point I decided, I'm tired of playing on the good side. Let me try and figure out how to play on the bad side. And the reason I did it at the time, and I say this all the time, with one exception, I like the acting part of it. With one exception, at least in my mind, you can't be a good actor unless you can play both hero and a villain.
Yeah.
Do you know who the
that's
exception
true.
is? Do you know who the exception is?
No.
Either of you? Because he's only really done it once or twice in his career and didn't really play a villain.
Denzel
Tom
Tom
Hanks.
Hanks.
Washington. Tom
Correct.
Hanks.
Yeah, Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks. The two times well, it depends on what you call the two times he's played a villain. One was Mazes and
Circle.
Monsters. No,
Oh,
Mazes and
Mazes and Monsters.
Monsters.
I don't know that he was the villain.
Kind of a villain, kind of a villain. However, the other one or two are in Cloud Atlas. In one of the brief vignettes, he played a villain. He played a villainous doctor. And depending on how you see Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis, he could have been a villain.
He's also in The Circle, where
I
he
didn't
is that
see
the
that
movie
one.
where he basically plays like a startup kind of genius, like a capitalist who eventually has
Okay,
a big company. It's supposed
I'm
to
not
be
too
a
familiar.
little like I'm trying to think of a name of one of them, Jeff Bezos or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, like an
And
Amazon or yeah.
yeah. But he ends up. I think he ends up kind of being a villain in that.
Okay, but I'll have
Yeah.
to go check it. But okay, that's one of the ones I have not seen. So that's my experience where I started playing a villain because I got to play foil to other player characters on a large scale. So I did that before I actually ran a villainous game, and I have run villainous games.
Oh.
Um, but where did you guys get your? Where did you guys first play villainous, or what you consider villainous characters?
Yeah, for me
Um,
it was also a mush. I played a human because, as I said, I never really got on the radar of any of the admins, and um, uh, and that human was just a lost soul, just like a street urchin, and just desperate, and not a good person. And then actually years later on another mush, I did the same, and then finally did get drawn into the Nosferatu, but I didn't really last on that much longer to really play the Nosferatu. But yeah, so you're right. The mush environment is very free form and much more conducive. And I think you run into fewer challenges because of that format than you would sitting around a table. How about you, Jonathan?
Two things I could bring up as examples. One isn't necessarily a role playing game, but I turned it into a role playing sort of. Um, I leveraged the role playing aspect of it at one point. I played a long time ago, back when it wasn't even. It's not even a mush. It's one of those games where you got on. It was like an imperial. You were playing basically a race in an empire that was building, and you had to gather planets of different types and gather weapons of different types, and then you could gather. I mean, there were different like uh, guns and butter kind of aspects to it, where you built up your empire based on different attributes. And I remember deciding I was going to play the evil empire and just have fun with it, because in this game you could buy Death Stars. They had, Death Star, an attribute where you could build a bunch of Death Stars. But then I also decided I was going to buy a bunch of spies, and the spies in this game allowed you to make people think that somebody else was doing something, and set somebody up to think, you attack them, but you make it look like somebody else. And I kept doing that, and then somebody figured it out, and then they all jumped on me, and I just played the villainous race, and I had this one thing where I wrote, as I was being killed, I was like the emperor of this villainous race with his fists, launched
You
against
monologue.
the we'll be back. And I really enjoyed that. But that wasn't strictly role playing, but I remember having fun with that. But
Right.
the
So
one
I'm
time,
not. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. What's
So
your
I'm not.
comment on
Well,
that?
you were going to talk about a different character, so I want to hear about that character before I make my point. So go ahead.
Okay, all right. The where I had a lot of fun, and it's not, I think, the game you were about to bring up, but my favorite evil character was in a game. I don't know if you were running it or if Phil Chase was running it, but it was an Ars Magica game. And the character was Lodvich of Grozny, and he was built to be a villain. And I started it off with that idea, but I really threw myself into it. And it was supposed to be Ars Magica. It was my mage character, and the mage character is your central character with companions and grogs being on the side. But he was my mage character, and we decided to make him uh, a. It was almost like Cthulhu esque sort of He was secretly he was secretly of the house, I think, that had gotten destroyed. I can't think of what the name of the
The
house
enemy.
was.
The
That
enemy.
right, right. Yeah, he was a Diedme, and he but he was secretly that, and his family had been that, and they were more like Cthulhu-esque alchemists, like monster makers,
Yeah.
and he could do all sorts of crazy stuff, and also he um, could handle orichalcum, which was this deadly metal in that game that really, if you're a magic user, you didn't want anything to do with. And I dragged another character, Phil's character, into like my evil plans at one point because we were being inspected by someone and we were about to get caught that we were doing something, and my character just went, it would be easy enough to just kill him and
Yeah.
and do away with him. And I drew Phil into it, and we ended up trapping this one uh, uh, Yerbitten. Is that it?
Yep.
And we got him into where he was helpless in his lab, and then I took out an orichalcum blade, and I hadn't been accepted into the order yet. And I remember I had this really maniacal uh, laugh, and then said, as I plunged the dagger into his chest, "I hope this doesn't affect my chances of entering the order." And
I
then he
remember.
just killed me with a knife. But
Yeah. That was a
yeah,
truly.
but and eventually all the characters who were slowly being dragged into it rebelled against it and killed my character, but it was
Yes.
great. It was like a really great way of ending the character, but I loved playing that, and it
Yeah,
was
I could tell, and you did it well, and you really played against type, because of all of the villainous games that we've played. So the Vegas game, where you played Hal, who really isn't a bad guy, except for the fact that he kind of hosts the bad PCs in his casino. The other game that I ran, and that's the reason why I put the evil slash dark side. It was a Star Wars game, and I pitched it to our group. I said, "What if we play a dark side game where everybody is like on the dark side?" And you guys were all into it. And so Michelle and Jason both played sort of like not Sith but dark acolyte type characters that were sort of flirting with the dark side of the Force, or used the dark side of the Force. Um, but I really liked your character the best because your character concept sort of freed you from any kind of responsibility as a person for playing a baddie, because your character was a droid. It was the torture droid, or one of those torture droids from the Death Star, and I was like, that's really cool because he's not really bad. He was just programmed that way.
anyway, yeah. There was this little big floating ball with a syringe on one side and some stuff, mechanical implements on the other side, and
And
you
all it would take would be
yeah,
like a simple brain wipe, and you could be like a good guy. So I
I love
really thought that was clever. But
yeah, yeah.
but you're right. Ludovic was a really villainous character. So there you have it, Mike. Those are and I won't go into. I did also play a bad guy, but only for one session, and I won't go into the story again because I've told it a couple of times in the Grognards
The player
Academy.
betrayal. Yeah, the player. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
the
yeah.
player betrayal. So I'm going to put in post production down here in this gray space. I'll list the episodes that I talk about it, and if viewers want to go back and watch it, if they're watching these out of order, they can. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So, and again, Star Wars reference because I
Yeah.
actually made notes about this specifically because I know you're both into Star Wars, at least somewhat. And you just mentioned the dark side game, because I'm thinking, and this is the other thing is how far do you take it and how do you get into character? Because
Mm,
when I was thinking Star Wars, I'm thinking the best Star Wars reference I can think of is okay, do you go as far as Anakin and the Sand People? Or do you go as far as Anakin and the Younglings? How far, you know, as a GM, you can do that because that's your
sure.
job. You're going to embody those kinds of characters. But when you're playing, is that different to you and how do you get into character and how far do you take it?
All right, so I'll let Jonathan answer that from the player's perspective since he played in that game, but I'll give you the GM's perspective. I'll tell you how I did it. So I set the game quite purposefully in the era uh, just before the events of the Phantom Menace. So Palpatine was conspiring, and everything was in the shadows. So everything that had to be there was we were cabined in what we could do. We couldn't do really grandiose, or the players couldn't really do grandiose evil things, or if they did, it had to sort of be undercover. It was very subtle, the stuff that they did. Um, but yeah, they they could have uh, done stuff like that, like murdering sand people. But the things that I had them doing was like sabotaging the Republic. And so, yeah, people died, but it was like, uh,
Off
it was,
screen.
what's that?
It's off screen. People
Uh,
dying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, it was sort of off screen, that sort of stuff, and it wouldn't be like civilians. It would kind of be like officials in the Republic and that sort of thing. Senator, assassinations of senators and Jedi, trying to take out Jedi and whittle down their ranks. Um, how about you from your side of the GM's screen? What did that game look like to you? Do you recall the lengths you guys went to and what you were willing to do?
Um, I yeah, I thought it was interesting trying to come up with the plots of how to do what we've been tasked to do. Um, I've always had a problem playing evil characters, and I've only done it a few times. Um,
Right.
uh, and you were I never really considered it that character did sort of free me to be evil, even though I I yeah, I mean it was an excuse to be able to do evil things because I was being told to do them, and it was a droid. But
Right.
um, I just remember being more caught up in the plot of how to murder a senator, or how to take out a Jedi, or um, I don't know. I don't know why that game. I guess maybe that was the reason that game was different. That I was able to kind of come up with that. I may have played in less game. How many did you run of those? Because I think I only played in about two or three, maybe.
Not many. I think you probably
Yeah.
played in all of the ones I ran, and
Okay.
that's a good segue to one of the other points I wanted to make is that World of Darkness had a lot of settings. They had the vampire setting, which was their first, and then they came out with werewolf, and then they came out with a whole bunch of others. Wraith and Changeling and Mummy was kind of like a subset of them, and Hunter. I think they ended with Hunter. It was like a monster
Well, they
hunter.
did Mage, too.
What's that?
Mage the Ascension. So you're
Mage.
basically
Right.
playing
You're
French
playing
user.
wizard. So they had a lot of these settings, but I'll never forget that in the Wraith book, in the Wraith the Oblivion core rule book, uh, it made a point to say this game is cursed, and like it's hard. You're gonna be hard pressed. We're just warning you. You're gonna be hard pressed to get through a campaign with this game. We're not sure why. We think it's just cursed. That's what they said. And I read that. I was like, yeah, come on. But Wraith was my favorite of all of the settings, and I have never managed to run a whole campaign except once, and it was only like a 3 to 5 session campaign. It was Paul and Steve Grabania and me, and so it was just the three of us, and we played. I don't even think it was 5 sessions. I think it was like 2 or 3 sessions, and that was it. And I had deliberately made a very short story arc, a very short campaign, because I didn't want to repeat what had happened time and time again, where we couldn't get through a campaign. And the reason I think that this quote unquote curse is a real thing is because you are dealing with your mortality. I mean, when you're playing a vampire or you're playing a mummy, it's such a caricature. But when you're playing the spirit of your dead self or a dead person, that really hits close to home. And I think that it's kind of tough for people to just like to wrestle with their mortality like that. And so it makes people uncomfortable, even if they're not consciously uncomfortable. I think subconsciously they become uncomfortable. And also thing like the difficulties of life can trigger like a player to be like, oh no, I'm not comfortable playing this. I'll give you an example. I was running a Wraith game, and about a month in, 6 weeks in, the players had experienced a death in the family, and they were like, you know what, I just not this. I'm not in that headspace anymore where I want to play a dead person. I'm like, yep, I totally get that. So I think the same is also true with evil games. Evil games, even if it's not, even if you're not consciously uncomfortable, I think that subconsciously it starts to eat away at you. One might say it eats at your soul, or this might be the abyss staring back, as Nietzsche put it. Or you're just getting uncomfortable, and so I think that that is one of the many challenges that one might encounter. Some other challenges, I'll name a few, and then I'll turn it over to you guys if you could think of some. Um, there might be the people around the table might have differing views on what is evil, you know, and so we encountered this recently in Mike's Dungeons and Dragons game, where I was playing a half orc thief at rogue, and we in the party went to this hunting lodge that had sort of a Gaston like character, and that's what I was talking about. The foil is a hero who is so shiny, you want to take him down a notch. And that was Gaston in Beauty and the Beast, and that was the owner of this hunting lodge, and he had the heads of orcs and half orcs hanging on the wall, like you would, like in a hunting lodge you would have animals. And of course this so deeply offended the half orc rogue that when an actual army of orcs came to attack the hunting lodge and the player characters came to the defense of the lodge, my character wasn't really, she was really taking that opportunity to like throw the mounted heads out the window and like vandalize the lodge
It's
and like
great.
sort of get revenge. Yeah, it was kind of funny. But I remember the role playing dialogue was she was sitting around the dinner table, and everybody's like, starting to get uncomfortable because they're realizing that these orc heads are mounted, and here she is, she's an orc, and I remember her saying like, this is really offensive. Like, it's one thing to vanquish your enemies, but to like treat them like they were animals, to mount their heads, and like the Gaston character's like, well, there are different standards. Like, people see things differently. In some cultures, it's perfectly normal to decapitate your enemy and mount their head on the wall. And that's something you have to contend with. That like in the real, like, among the players, that was happening among the characters, but among the players around the table, that is also true. There may be different views on what is evil, and a third, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. A third challenge I see is that there are really very few sources to draw from, because especially in Western storytelling, we're always telling stories from the POV of the heroes, and so it's hard to find tropes. It's hard to know how to do it because there's so few models. What other challenges do you guys see in evil games or dark side games?
So
I
go ahead, Jonathan.
no, you
Oh,
go
oh,
first.
okay. So, and it goes along kind of with your last point, which is people are used to playing the heroes. Okay, and you've mentioned some of this before, because a lot of the challenges that you speak of are correct, but it's also, like I said, it is how do you know setting goals. How does the evil party win? Do they destroy the world? Do they do this? What is winning? You know, do they destroy a society? Do they destroy a country? Do they do what is winning for the villainous character? What is the win? What's the goal? What's the win?
Right.
And if they accomplish their goal, you know, and again, think of it from a Western standpoint. If they destroy the world, they win. There's nothing left for them to do. So what's the next adventure going to be? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So if you get your, what's the next adventure? How do you run? I mean, I can see running like, a short term, like a short arc, but how do you run an extended campaign with evil characters? Now I will also couch that by saying, and this is not actually from a villain, but it is kind of a dark thing. There are games out there that are very dark, like like the Cthulhu games,
Hmm.
like the new Candela Obscura games, where you go into it up front knowing your character is not going to survive. Eventually, they're going to go mad, or they're going to get broken, or they're going to, you know, whatever. It's not a happy retirement plan. So, you know, is that how you lead that? Once the villains get done, they die doing whatever they're doing, or once they're done, it's done. The character arc is over. How do you do that and keep it interesting? But like you said, it's usually a short thing. It's not usually a long thing. You know, it's usually a break from I'm tired of playing the goody goody. Um, I call it the bomb for the murder hobo. If you're familiar with the murder hobo, you
Yes.
know, run an evil campaign or an evil arc every once in a while just to keep your regular game from going murder hobo. Um, but that's the kind of challenge. It's never a long term arc. It's you always have to look at it as could people play it as long term arc? Yes. Would it possibly be disturbing? Probably. Um, so that's one of the major challenges I see from that side of that aspect.
That's a good challenge. After Jonathan has to say, I want to circle back to that, to how does it end. But I think we've got a little bit more to talk about before we talk about how to end such a campaign. So go ahead, Jonathan. What were you going to point out?
I think I'm agreeing with something you said earlier, in that the balance of how the players are playing it, because how do you essentially, I guess with a good game, you have like X cards and ways of saying, I'm not comfortable with this.
Right.
Where do you put the guardrails in an evil game? Because some people are not going to be comfortable with everything you do, and some people are going to want to go all the way and
Yep.
really do some horrendous evil things. So
Yep.
how do you put a guardrail in for that? Also, how are the players? Are they playing characters that are evil and know it, or are they playing characters who think they're doing the right thing? But I mean, humans all think they're doing the right thing for the most part. I mean, and they rationalize it to themselves that I'm doing the right thing, and they have horrific ways of rationalizing what they're doing. But for the most part, they try to make it seem to themselves like they're doing the right thing, but they end up being the horrible villains in the world. And are you playing characters like that, or are you playing characters that are more I'd have to say maybe a little one or two dimensional, that are just the evil character and they know it.
Right. So
And
I'm sorry, Mike. I just want to say yes.
no,
You definitely want to know your audience. You definitely want
Mhm.
to know their limits, and you definitely want to know when and how to cut things off, or reel things in, or or fade to black, or handle it off screen. Go ahead, Mike. What were you going to say?
and Jonathan just made me think about something, because it's also the other thing is, and absolutely a challenge, because it kind of goes against, I want to say it goes against trope. Okay, unless you have a hierarchy among the players, is there honor among thieves, and are all of their evil goals aligned?
You're right.
Which goes
Um,
back to villains fighting villains, or people
yes,
fighting each other.
how much infighting you're going to have in front of the party, because this person's evil, A type, and this is evil person B type, and
Evil
it's,
person,
I'm like,
evil person.
yeah, exactly. So how do you get how do you get that balance? And I've got an interesting thing that I saw online that I'll share afterwards. From a perspective, it's a perspective thing that'll make you laugh. That'll make you laugh. That kind of goes into what Jonathan said about do they think they're good? Do they think they're the good guys? So,
Oh, is
but
this
remind
the
me
Are
about
We
that
the
when I get to
Baddies?
that.
Is this the Are We the Baddies skit?
Are we the
Huh?
baddies?
No, no,
Yes.
this is not the are. Well, it sort of is. Are we the bad? No, I'll tell you now, and you can think about it.
If
It was
anybody,
something that was posted.
anybody who's watching this gets a chance to watch, I can't remember the names of the two comedians. It's a British comedian show where they're doing a skit, which is basically if you punch in "Are we the baddies?" you'll get
Yeah,
this very very funny British
you'll
skit
find it.
about Nazis basically questioning that.
So again, you can't tell if people on the internet are true, but it's a brilliant idea if you think about it. Okay, you run two campaigns with the same players. Okay, and in the first campaign, they're defending the crown, protecting the children of the king. Blah 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 blah. And you go all the way through the campaign, right? To a point. You don't really end it. You go to the next campaign. They're on the side of the people rebelling against the evil leaders, and the last BBEG they face is their original party.
That's awesome. That's really
Great
awesome.
idea.
That is a great idea.
I've actually got a similar issue that I'm going to be facing in a few weeks. I'm going to be running um, the new, well, it's actually only the quick start adventure that they have, but I'm going to be running um, the Planet of the Apes RPG that's just coming out, and I'm going to be running it at a campaign at a convention. But the thing I just found out when I finally read the I read the adventure that they have. You're basically playing apes who are hunting a human um, that or humans that they think are threatening their village. So essentially, they're going to be sort of the heavies hunting the humans, and I'm not sure how I'm going to play that or how I'm going to run that as a GM, but I am essentially going to be running an evil game because and I wasn't aware that they were going to do that. I thought it was going to be more like they were going to figure out rationalize some way why a human and an ape and one of the underworlders would have been hanging out with each other. But in this case, it's really you're just playing a chimpanzee, an orangutan, or an ape, or a gorilla, and you're hunting down these humans. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, and whether people are going to be liking it or not. But I'm going to go with it. Yeah, it's going to be like.
I mean, if anybody could do it, JB, you can do it. But you've really got your work cut out for you because this is difficult enough with people you know in an intimate
Uh,
group. To do it with people you don't know, I mean,
well,
that's be a
I'm going to
challenge.
have to. I'm going to have to set up some things where I'm going to say, look, if somebody's not comfortable with what's going on, I'm going to have to say, you need to bring it up right away
Might need to.
because
Yeah, but you'll
yeah.
definitely need to. Those three things I just mentioned, you'll need to know the limits, and I don't know how you're going to do that with people that you don't know, but you're going to have to get a feel for that quickly. You're going to have to know when to reel it in, you've used many of the things that I just listed in that example of how to reel it in, fading to black, do off screen stuff. I've actually learned techniques like that from you, so I have full confidence. But one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking was like who do you play? And so that was actually one of the other topics I wanted to talk about in this subject. So one thing you could do is the players could play minions of an overarching arch villain. They could play members of a criminal organization like Paul's character in the Vegas game, where he's part of the Bonanno crime family, or they could play their own independent villains. Like Mike's character, who doesn't really answer to anybody. You're just doing your own thing in that Vegas game. Um, and so those are some examples. The thing is, if you're playing independent villains, ego is what's really going to be driving the plot generally, because minions are going to be following orders, but independent villains are acting based on their own ego. So it might require the game master to get to know or to work with that player to develop that player character's background a little bit more, so that the GM can play to the ego of the character and move that character's activities along. Give that character motivations and motives. So, and then lastly, just before we get to how does it end, we should answer the question like, okay, so just how do you do it? Like, how if I've never run an evil game before, how do you do it? And so I want to give each of you an opportunity to say that. I'll say my piece, and then I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll go to our last how does it end subtopic. So I think the way I do it, the way to run evil games, is to just take one way to do is to take a traditional story and alter the flavor of it slightly so that it can be played by evil characters, like maybe invert it. So let's take an example everyone knows: A New Hope, right? So instead of A New Hope playing out the way it does, here's the way I've suggested. I wrote a little summary to give you an example of how you might change A New Hope to Star Wars: A New Tyrant. So Luke Skywalker's journey now is not a noble quest to restore peace to the galaxy, but a cunning plot to seize power and dominate the universe. Discovering his Sith heritage, Luke sets out from Tatooine with malevolent intent, manipulating the naive Princess Leia and the rebellion to eliminate his rivals in the Empire. With the help of his sinister droid, whom he has reprogrammed, R2D2, and the ruthless smuggler Han Solo, whose heart of gold is never given an opportunity to shine because Luke really kind of drags him into the abyss with him. Luke orchestrates the destruction of the Death Star, not to save lives, but to remove a dangerous obstacle to his ascension. All the while, he feigns innocence and loyalty to the rebel cause, his true aim to overthrow both the Emperor and Darth Vader and install himself as the ultimate ruler of the galaxy. Plunges the galaxy into darkness. So that's how I might do it. Just so you just take a spin. How about you? How do you run a dark side game? How might you guys do it? Or an evil?
So so and Jonathan may appreciate this. I go to film, and the reason I go to film, you don't see a lot of, I guess, very little evil perspective, but you see a lot of evil characters, and I hate that, a trope. My go-to is a Gary Oldman villain. I
Oh, I know
love
what you're
Gary Oldman villains. I just love them. Like The Professional, even Fifth Element, as bad of a good movie as it is, you know,
He's great
I
in it though. He's the Fifth Element.
oh, he is amazing. I have that. At one point I had that whole speech. Life, which you so nobly serve, comes from destruction, disorder, and chaos. Love it. Great. Um, British guy doing a bad Southern accent. Love it. Um, but um, I take the villains that I like, and I'll take the story, and rather than running from the plot from the heroic side, I'll look at the plot from the villain side of that particular movie. And what if they succeed? What if they don't get foot? And that's where I start for a lot of my evil games, or even some of my evil characters, and how to build them out. That's really where I look at things from a film perspective, because even though films where mostly the good guys win, um, you can get a lot of material from watching the villains in really good, really good villains in movies. So
Yeah.
that's where
And,
I get my inspiration.
and before Jonathan goes, I want to. So you mentioned that you've run a number of evil games. Can you give us some quick examples of some that you've run?
Believe it or not, most of them were in World of Darkness. So I would run Sabat vampires. I would run, the corrupted werewolves. I would run the diabolic magi. Um, so most of them come from there. I did shortly run and this was a while ago, a D&D evil campaign. It didn't go far, not because of lack of player interest, but it ran into the scheduling issues, and
Ah,
it's like, can we get here? So I never got to really develop it, but it was kind of, that one was more running. You're on the side of the tyrant. You are the team. You know, Again, like you said, minions. You are the minions of the tyrant that the good guys are trying to, get into his castle and ruin his plans. About You were the other group, and that's how I ran that evil campaign.
awesome. All right. And Jonathan, how might you run an evil campaign?
I would say one of the important things would be, and you mentioned it earlier, a shorter campaign to make sure that it doesn't just fly off the handle, but also give it an exit strategy. You should give it a goal that once you get to the goal, that's the end of the story, so that you don't keep, it doesn't fly off the handle. Um, there is a friend of mine, Chris Wayman, who ran a game that I thought was pretty good. It just, again, for I think for scheduling issues, we ended up not finishing up much of it. But it was a great concept. It was written from a campaign background called Necessary Evil. It's for Savage Worlds, and it's a setup where the bad guys basically have to get along with each other because you're the villains in the superhero world, but all the superheroes have been killed by these aliens. And so the villains end up having to defend the Earth just because they don't want the aliens taking over because it cuts in on their profit. Or so they all are forced to get together, even though they don't want to, even against uh, the um, the their egos kind of clashing with each other. They're forced to get along just enough to be able to defend the Earth. And I thought it was a great idea for evil characters that they go on to defend the Earth, and once that happens, you can kind of end the game. But I remember it was a very, very interesting game, and people played different kinds of villains. One of them was totally insane. Another one was trying to get back his tyrannical rule of Atlantis. I played that one. And so there were other characters in it that were in it for completely different reasons. But we had to kind of figure out a way to run them so that they would get along enough to do what they needed to do. And I thought it was an interesting motivation, and it was an interesting dynamic between the characters.
That is interesting, and really, you kind of answered my last question. How does it end? I mean, those are excellent examples. And Mike, you really kind of earlier touched on ending. So, do either of you have anything more you might want to add to how does it end before I give my input on
So, do you, and I have done this, but I'll ask you, do you let the players know of somewhat of a predetermined ending? And I will give you, and I will give you things because I've seen this. I have seen this done. Um, I've seen this done both on the good and the bad side. You know, which is, you know, your characters are going to die, and we've talked about like in the heart, your characters are going to die, but in the case of the good guys, you're going to make something world changing that's going to be beneficial, and you can do that the same on the evil side. You're going to lose, but you're going to rid the world of three heroes in the process. That kind of thing. Do you have a predetermined ending that you tell the characters, as opposed to when you do a more heroic campaign, that you don't tell them what the ending is?
it.
Because is that the way to shorten the arc, or you know meet the
Well,
goal?
yeah, actually, it goes back to what I was pointing out from the book Proactive Role Playing, um, because the heroes have something to aim for because the villains have already set the fuse. It's
Right.
to destroy the villain. The villains can decide to do anything they want, and maybe you don't tell them. Whereas the heroes, you sort of they get the idea all along what their eventual arc is going to be, and the villains are more like they're deciding what their arc's going to be. So maybe you don't tell the villains what you let them decide what their arc's going to be, and then run with it.
Okay.
Right. Excellent. All right. So my thoughts about how to end it um, are as follows. I think there are a few options, and I'm going to end with my favorite one because I think it may be the secret recipe to a long campaign that doesn't wear away the player's souls. So I'll save that for last. So one of the most obvious ways I think it could end is everyone dies, and you might need to, as Mike said, clear that with the players before you even start. Um, but it's one way. I think it's one thing for a total party kill when everybody's playing heroes. I think that a table full of players could feel cheated. However, when everybody's playing a villain, they might be more open to it. I'm not saying spring it on them, but they might be more open to it because I think in the end, everybody kind of realized, well, you know, our characters really were baddies, and this is their comeuppance, and it's a glorious ending. And I point to Danny Mac's glorious ending in our pulp game. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was self-sacrifice, right? He threw the cigarette into the gasoline, blew up the warehouse, killed all the villains and himself in the process. But he had us leave first. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan. You want to say something?
Or it could be more of a. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this old film, Jimmy Cagney, a film called White Heat, which is what I would call the
Oh
Cody
yeah.
Jarrett, the Cody Jarrett end, where he's standing on top of the cops are surrounding him, and he's standing on top of a big fuel tank, and he's just
Yeah.
like firing off his gun, like, top of the world, ma, and then blows himself up.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's the end of the movie, where he
Yeah,
just does it to just, you're going to take me, I'm going to take myself out,
right. It's better to
kind of.
burn out than fade away. Like it could be a glorious ending, and that could be a very fulfilling ending. And the players won't really feel ripped off by losing their characters because they're kind of like, yeah, our characters got what they deserved. That was a really cool ending. So that might actually work. Another way you can do it if the players aren't up for that is everyone survives. They fulfill their villainous plot, and then you can just kind of like narrate a brief summary of what happens in the end. And Jonathan, you did this one time to great effect. You ran a Cthulhu game out of a module, and I was playing a gangster type, and I think that my thing was the ghosts of all of I played like a gangster hitman, and the ghosts of all of the people I had murdered, my character had murdered over the years of his decades long career, were haunting him. We're always traveling with him. They were always around him, and they were like driving him mad. And in one sense, that had kind of made him a little bit that had built up a resistance to scary things for him. And so your final ending, I think when I played my characters as not reacting the way a normal character would react, because he was always haunted by these weird things. But we were running short on time, and you were looking for a satisfying ending. And what you did, what I was something I thought was really brilliant. You said, all right. You then like kind of brought the camera up, and you narrated like what happened, and you like ended with like a freeze frame where this Cthulhu like monster is leaping down on me, and then freeze frame. And I thought that was really clever. So you knew like kind of when to fade to black. You faded to black, or you freeze framed in that situation.
I
But
think
then
that was that was a shadow over Innsmouth.
I think
You guys
that's
were
right.
running through
Shadow
shadow over
was
Innsmouth.
the
Right, yeah, I
module.
remember that card.
And then you kind of gave like this little brief summary of like all right, the characters go on to do this and that. um I don't know if that's going to be fulfilling, because sometimes the players may feel like their agency's been taken away from them. If you did it to great effect, but I could see like a lesser GM might disappoint characters by trying that method. It's difficult. Another thing is like the characters could just become uh dark gods, in a sense. Like they could become like dark deities. And in a sense, I did this to a pretty good effect with Star Frontiers. I played Star Frontiers with Paul and another fellow, Ed, and the aforementioned Steve. I mentioned him earlier. And we played this game for years and years and years. And Ed really kind of played an anti-hero, but the more he played him, the like sort of the badder he got instead of the better he got. And so, but at the end of that run, that campaign had come to an end, and then some years later, we started a new Star Frontiers campaign. And what I did was I took Ed's old character, and I made him like the overarching villain, and so they were like fighting against him. So that worked well. I mean, it was like a little bit of fan service for all the players. They were like, "Oh, this is Ed's character that's like our major foil," and so the but that can be a satisfying ending, because like the players are like, "All right, we achieved like 20th level. We got to we're now the dark deities of this universe." And that could be like sort of fitting end to the campaign, a dark end indeed, to be sure, but fitting in. Um, the flip of that could be that dark forces call in their debts, or perhaps the forces of justice, be they divine or mortal, call in the debts for all of the villainous things that that the players do. They could get arrested in a street level game, or they could be drawn into the abyss in a fantasy game, um, stuff like that. Uh, so those are some suggestions, but I think that my favorite is oh well, actually, before I get to my favorite, there is one more that I thought of: individual epilogues. You could turn it over and say, okay, that's the end of the campaign. You've succeeded in in acquiring the dark MacGuffin. What happens to your character, Mike? And then it could be like that final food fight ending credits scene in Animal House where it's like freeze frame, like one guy like about to throw a cream pie, and it says like Jake Smith became a surgeon, and yeah, and so you
Killed
can
by his own killed by his own men in Vietnam.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Mike, what happens to your character? Like how does his where does the story go from here? And then Jonathan, what happens to your character? And that could be a lot of fun. I did the opposite of that when Wizards of the Coast came out with the D20 modern setting, which was basically a D20 mechanics, but it was meant to tell modern action hero stories. Things like cop stories, or Die Hard kind of stuff, or just modern two-fisted adventurer type stories set in the modern era. I ran a game using that system set in the 1970s, and I called it D20 Mod, and I modeled it after the action shows of the action television shows of the 1970s. And the way I started every session, and this was so much fun, I put on a song. I can't think of the name of the song, but I'm going to put the title and the artist right here, Billy somebody, and space
Billy
something.
Idol?
No, no, no.
That's the
it was a funk singer from the 70s, but it was a really like kind of funky 70s song, and it was instrumental. And while that was playing, I said, all right. I called the game "They Fight Crime," and so I played the music, and then I said, "They Fight Crime," starring, and I had already had everybody around the table pick who they imagined playing their character. So, starring Ed Asner as Father Mike, and I turned to the guy who was playing Father Mike, whom he imagined as Ed Asner, and I'd say go, and I'd point at him, and the player would narrate what kind of action scene they took a clip of from the series in the opening montage. And he had like 10 seconds to narrate it. And it'd be like, Father Mike is like walking down the street, a bunch of street thugs like surround him. And he like throws a cigarette down and rolls up his sleeves. And when they see his brawny forearms, they all turn and run. Great. All right. And also starring Avery so and so as Hawk. And I pointed to the guys. What do we see? And he's like, Hawk's walking down the street with his three-quarter leather jacket, and and he describes, this punk comes up on a motorcycle, and he would just like narrate it for like 10 seconds, like great. And then I turned to the next character, and we went around the table. I think we did it like maybe we went twice around, and then the song came to an end, and it was like, and then we ended with "They Fight Crime," and then the song would come to an end, and that was like the end of the opening credits, and we went into my session, and we had more fun sometimes just doing that
doing
opening
the opening.
where everybody to describe their prelude than we did, even playing the game. So you could do that. So I can attest that that's a lot of fun for the players. They're, they know that they have to do it that day, so they might think a little bit about it. But you're putting them on the spot. When you point at them and go, and the music's playing, they're like, it's really exciting. So you could do
I may
that.
steal that. I may
Yes,
steal that sometime.
steal it. It's so much fun. But you could end the story with that, without the pressure, without the soundtrack, and you could be just like, all right, Mike, you tell me what happens, and you give the individual epilogues. So that brings me to my last suggestion, and my last suggestion I think might be the recipe for a long-term campaign that won't eat the player's souls, and that is redemption. So this is challenging because it's unlikely that all of the player characters are going to experience redemption from some event, or some twist of events or turn of events. It is possible, and I think a really good story, you could pull it off if you give it enough thought. However, it doesn't have to be the case that everybody is redeemed. Like some players at the end of the evil campaign might be ready to move on from that character, and they might be willing to use any of the other endings. That my character dies, my character is drawn into the abyss, my character is imprisoned, my character is killed by his own men in Vietnam, using the Animal House thing. But the ones who have grown attached to this character and might like to soften the character, can have the character become redeemed. And then what you have is, you have one of my favorite characters from um, Astro City, the Astro City comic line. Astro City is like, it's supposed to be Metropolis or Gotham or both of them mixed
Yeah.
together, and it's a play on Marvel heroes and DC heroes. And it might have started out as being like a thinly veiled imitation, but it really took on a life of its own and became really its own third superhero company. And I really liked Astro City. And one of my favorite characters, I can't think of his name. Again, I'll put it here in post production. But he was a character who had been a supervillain that had been arrested, and he went to prison, and he served his time in prison, and he had time to think about what he did, and he had a change of heart. And when he was let out of prison, he just wanted to stay out of trouble, but he couldn't, because his old life kept like creeping back in, and all of his affiliates and associates and the things he had done were starting to be drawn toward him. But this time, see, he was reformed, and he became an anti-hero, and he actually fought for good, against all of these forces that were trying to draw him back in. And I really loved that character. I can't think of the name of the character, but I'll have it here. And so your villainous characters can have a redemption. Some of them, maybe all of them, if you can manage it. But those players who want their characters to transition from villain to anti-hero, or from villain to actual hero, can. And so the best example of this is the tragedy of Darth Vader. So Darth Vader is the villain until the last 10 minutes of his life, and he's redeemed, and it worked really well. So
Mhm.
uh so anyway, those are my thoughts. Any thoughts before I ask you guys what our next topic should be?
One
No,
one interesting thought on your ending,
Yeah.
okay? And this came up recently, again, in cinema. You're gonna like, may or may not like, if you've been following the Marvel, the MCU series, particularly
Yes.
the Avengers, okay?
Okay.
Thanos, bad guy, wants to kill half of everybody in the universe.
Right.
hmm.
What does he do after he kills everybody, half of everybody in the universe?
He goes to Disneyland.
No, well, yes and no. He
He goes and becomes a
almost,
farmer, basically.
almost kills himself, destroying the tool that he used to do this so nobody else could do it or undo it, and then goes and becomes a farmer.
Ah, ha, ha, ha.
And it was just one of the most interesting end of villain arcs I've seen
When
in
they go to
recent
kill
days.
him, he's almost like, I knew this was coming. I knew eventually you guys would find where I was, and he
He
almost
didn't.
accepts it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just an interesting villain arc. So just a thought.
That is it. That is an interesting villain arc. All right. Well, I think that was very entertaining, very informative. I hope our audience liked it as much as I like doing that with you guys. So, what's next on Grognards of Gaming? Do we have a topic that we're interested in talking about?
I have one, and maybe since we've gone dark and evil, we can go a little lighter
Okay.
and talk about ambiance and prompts.
Love it. Ambiance and prompts. Let's do it. Next time on
Okay.
Grognards of Gaming, join us for our panel discussion on ambiance and prompts. And thank you for watching, everybody.